Let's shift to science. What makes the human brain different from other animals, and why does that matter for music? Humans are aware of our own existence. We experience love, anticipate death, and create art. Music is one of those uniquely human expressions. Our brain is wired to find and create beauty, and music is a powerful way that we do that. It engages our emotions, our intellect, and our creativity in ways that few other activities can. We'll now watch a short video about music and the brain. As you watch, notice how our brain is structured and what makes it unique.
Hello, I'm Mickey Adams. I'm an anatomy and physiology instructor at Wilson Community College. I'm also a lifelong music lover. If you're watching this video, you are taking a music appreciation class, and your instructor thought it might be nice for me to give you a short introduction to how neurophysiology works when it comes to dealing with music. So, at the center of our nervous system is, of course, the human brain. This is a remarkable organ, far and away the most complex organ of the human body. And if you compare the size of our brain to the size of our body, we, as a species, have the largest brain on Earth, and without any doubts, we have the most complex brain on Earth, especially here in the front of the brain, where our brain is abnormally large compared to every other species. Now, just a quick introduction to the kind of geography of the brain. This big wrinkled mass on top, all of this is called the cerebrum. That's mostly what we're going to talk about for the next couple of minutes. That's where most of our really complex things happen. We can also talk about, or we should mention, there are 3 parts of the brain here that connect to the top of your spinal cord. We can collectively call those the brainstem. We're not really going to talk about much of those. That's what runs the machinery, if you want to think of it that way, your heart and lungs and digestion, etc. I do want to mention this other wrinkled mass here on the back of the brain. This is called the cerebellum. It's also really complicated and will play a role in one particular aspect of how we access music. So, when it comes to neurological function, we think of 3 very broad things that the brain does. It senses, it brings information in, it integrates or processes that information and puts meaning and detects patterns, all that sort of stuff definitely plays a role in music. And then the brain and the nervous system can generate motor commands. And that is to say the brain tells parts of the body what to do. In this case, we're talking about almost exclusively the control of our muscles. Muscles we play instruments with and the muscles we use to speak or sing. So let's talk about sensing, bringing sound, music into our brain. Obviously, we can experience music with multiple senses, but the one we're going to concentrate on is our sense of hearing or audition. So sound is vibrating air. That vibrating air moves into our ear canal. It hits a little tiny membrane called the tympanic membrane. You probably call it the eardrum. That shakes some bones, which sends vibrations into a little coiled up, snail-looking little device in the center of our skull. It's called the cochlea. And when those waves hit little hairs inside the cochlea, those hairs generate nerve signals that travel to the brain. Now, those nerve signals travel across a nerve called the cochlear nerve. And it travels first to this little thing right here in the middle. The cochlear nerve comes up into the brainstem, comes into this thing. It's called the thalamus. And the thalamus is what connects all of your sensory information, all of your sensory input to the cerebrum, the big processing center out here on the outside of the brain. So in this particular case, all of that information from the ear is going to come right about here. Okay? This is called the temporal lobe of the cerebrum, and this part's called the primary auditory cortex. These cells receive the information from your ear. They detect and can measure what the pitch is, what the frequencies of sound that you're hearing, as well as how loud they are, and on which side of your head you're hearing them from. But that's all it can do. That's obviously not processing music. That's just receiving information. So from there, the information in this little cluster of cells is going to spread out, especially and initially into this part. It's called the auditory association area. And that's where the magic really begins. So, as I'm sure you have probably heard, when you speak or play an instrument, you're not just playing one note. Okay? The difference between hearing my voice and hearing your voice is that the central note, the loudest note of phonation, of sound that I'm making, is accompanied by a bunch of smaller peaks. And that's how you recognize my voice. It's also how you recognize the difference between, say, a piano and a guitar. And this part of the brain starts to process that and say, hey, that note in the middle, that's really important. That's the sound I should listen to. But all these other peaks mean I'm hearing something specific. Now that information is going to spread through a fairly large chunk of our brain. This entire area is often called the general interpretative area. And that's where we're going to take all the things that we've learned, all of our memory, all of our associations, and it's going to take that information and say, hey, that's a piano, or hey, that's a guitar. Hey, that piano is playing Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's how we're going to recognize the melody. It's also how we're going to begin to attach information to it. Hey, I heard this song when I was a kid. It makes me remember my childhood. All of that's going to be processed all through here. Now, there's one particularly important area for doing that. This part of the general interpretative area, this is called Wernicke's area. And Wernicke's area plays a huge role in music, but it is also central to all of our language processing. This part of the brain is where we know the meanings of words as well as what they sound like. And clearly, if we're listening to music that has lyrics, words, information that's being imparted, Wernicke's is going to play a big role in that. Now, one of the neat things about the brain, the cerebrum in particular, is you notice it's got this big split. It has a left and a right hemisphere. And they are effectively two entirely separate computers. Everything we've been talking about is happening from one ear goes to this side, one to the other. But Wernicke's area is actually only on one side of the brain. And frankly, in about 90% of people, it's here on the left side. Okay? But the same spot on the opposite hemisphere, while it is not processing language, it's actually starting to process the emotional content. Okay? The things we do on one side, for most people, again, the left side of the brain is very factual. It's language-based. We process math with the same part of the brain. The opposite side processes the same information, but looks for emotional context. It looks for meaning. It looks for intuition. It makes maps of the world using this information. And so, Wernicke's area on one side proper and the associated area on the opposite side is how we're going to interpret music as what we're hearing. And I'll be frank, no one really understands why humans can do this. We have a uniquely powerful ability to process patterns. No other species, as near as we can tell, can process patterns the same way that we do, to the same depth. As a note, it took almost 60 years and billions of dollars to get supercomputers to learn to recognize melodies out of music from the sounds that instruments were playing. And we all do it automatically, usually by the time we were 5 or 6 months of age, which is pretty darn impressive. So, once we have received that music we're hearing, now we want to perform music. Well, now we're going to start talking about motor function and planning. So, if I want to sing, which is my favorite way to participate in music, it's going to start for me here in Wernicke's area. I need to know the words I'm going to sing. I also need to recognize the melody. And again, that pattern recognition is here in Wernicke's area. Again, I guess I should turn to this side to show you where it is for most people, on the left side of the brain. And now I need to figure out how to get my muscles, the muscles that control my larynx, my diaphragm, the muscles that control my posture. All of these things are going to get involved with me being able to perform music. So Wernicke's area is going to reach out, and it's going to reach right up here to the front to an area called Broca's area. And again, Broca's area is generally only on one side of the brain. In most people, it's the left side. Whatever side your Wernicke's area is, your Broca's area is also going to be on that side. And Broca's area, while it doesn't talk directly to our muscles, it talks to this little strip of brain here, which is what the part of the brain that does talk to our muscles. Well, it talks to our spinal cord, and our spinal cord talks to our muscles. But Broca's area is where we're going to say, hey, I need to say these words in this order. And Broca's area comes up with a plan of how to use the muscles involved with speech. The muscles of our mouth, our pharynx, our throat, the muscles of our larynx, all these things need to cooperate. It's going to take that information, and it's also going to consult the other really big motor part of our brain, that other wrinkled mass back here, the cerebellum. The cerebellum is kind of in charge of all big, complex muscle activities. So the fact that I'm standing here talking to you while standing upright and balanced with hopefully acceptable posture, the cerebellum's involved with that, because this part of my brain that directly talks to muscles can really only do one thing at a time. So Broca's area, in conjunction with our cerebellum, as well as a few deep structures inside the brain that we don't really have good access to on this model, they're all going to come together and make a plan. And then they will feed that plan to our motor cortex, which will talk to our spinal cord, which will then talk to all these muscles. Now, I mentioned in passing that these two hemispheres do different things. Clearly, if I'm going to sing music, I need to hear the music, I need to feel the emotion, I need my two computers to talk to each other. If we look right in the middle of the brain, we see a really neat feature that is particularly important in music and is particularly affected by music. This little arch is a bunch of nerves whose only job is to connect all of the cells on the right side of my hemisphere to all of those same cells on the left hemisphere. This structure is called the corpus callosum. Some say corpus callosum. This is how we coordinate our logic and math and our ability to hear those patterns and then attach meaning and emotional context to them. Now, what's really neat about the corpus callosum is if you started participating in music, especially at a very early age, like before the age of 6, especially if you play a two-handed instrument like the piano or guitar or violin, all of those instruments have definitely been tested, your corpus callosum, compared to other people with the exact same size brain that you have, will be up to 15% larger, simply because you spent all that extra developmental time coordinating activity between the left and right hemispheres. And if you start participating in music later in life, you can still see some growth in the corpus callosum. We also think, by the way, that corpus callosum, that increase in size, is behind one of the other neat phenomena for studying music. Turns out, the more you study music, especially earlier in life, up through your teen years, if you started then, you're actually up to 10 or 15% better at doing math. We're not entirely sure why, but clearly those same structures that let us recognize patterns in music are playing roles in helping us to process math. One last thing I want to point out, this center part of the brain, we pointed to the thalamus earlier, this entire area is part of the limbic system. It includes all these other parts of the brain. And we already talked about the fact that all of our hearing passes through this part of it, the thalamus. And of course the corpus callosum sits right next to it. This is the part of the brain that generates all of our emotions. Sadness, happiness, reward, pleasure, hunger, thirst, all of these things come from this part of the brain. It's also the part of the brain that's in charge of helping us make memories. Okay? It's also where we tend to make most of our decisions. And certainly it's connected to other parts of the brain. But if you ever hear a song and suddenly you remember the first time you heard that song, or you get the emotions of the first time that song really hits you, it's because this center of the brain, right in the center of where you process music, is where you're making memories and is where you're making emotions. I hope some or all of this is helpful to you. If you have questions or would like to talk about any of this more, your instructor can give you my contact information. My door is always open to talk about music or the brain. Thanks.
So as you learned from the video, the human brain has 3 main regions: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. What sets us apart is not just size, but how densely packed our cerebral cortex is with neurons and how effectively these neurons communicate. The dense layered brain structure gives rise to language and music. Both are deeply embedded in who we are. Now, Mr. Adams also talked about 2 distinct areas in our brain, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Just a reminder, Broca's area controls our ability to physically produce speech. It was discovered by French neurologist Paul Broca. Wernicke's area helps us understand language, and it was named after German neurologist Karl Wernicke. What's fascinating is that these regions also help us process music. That means our brain doesn't treat music as an optional luxury. It processes it alongside essential human functions like speech.